11 councillors have quit Labour over the party's stance on the Gaza ceasefire. Calls for Keir Starmer to resign have been issued. Will he stay or will he go? I'm delighted to be joined for the first time on my first show by my new panel, political analyst Alice Grant. Very good evening to you. Author and journalist Laura Dodsworth, who we know very well, and Conservative MP for Hitchin and Harpenden, Bim Afolami. Bim, welcome. You nearly didn't quite make it there, but I'll let you off for being slightly late. You might be getting some hard questions a bit later on, though.
It's the least, it's what I deserve.
given what has been going on. But let's talk a bit about, Alice, first of all, to you. The problem for Keir Starmer with his stance on Gaza, standing firm, saying he doesn't want a ceasefire. He's now got people not only resigning from the Labour Party, but actually calling for him to resign as leader. Is this going to get worse for him, do you think?
Well, I mean, at the moment we're witnessing a Labour Party which is completely unfit to govern. And I think the point that I want to be hammering in tonight is how destructive a Labour Party government would be for this country. I don't think we even realise how bad it would be if Labour got into power. And I know that things are right now not exactly perfect with the Conservative Party, to put it mildly, but I think that Keir Starmer is a very weak leader. And in the current geopolitical situation, we simply can't have men who just lie barefacedly, as he did only a week later, saying that we had misconstrued the words in the interview.
Oh yeah, he was answering an earlier question.
But in fact, it was clear. He was asked a very clear question. Do you agree with essentially the starving of the Gaza Palestinians and the sieging of them and the cutting off the water supply? And he said that it was part of, it was a right.
Yeah, he said it was fine. He said they had the right to defend themselves, including withholding all sorts of aid and withholding electricity and water and all the rest of it. Laura, I mean, what do you make of this Labour Party kind of stramash? Because they don't seem quite to be able to agree on anything.
Well, I think what you see here is some very clear collectivist tribal thinking going on. It would appear, I might be making a sweeping generalisation, but that they're all Muslim councillors.
Yeah.
I mean, as you know, I set up the October Declaration, which was a declaration showing solidarity with British Jews. And one problem we had when we first reached out to Labour MPs was that Labour MPs with a strong Muslim constituency didn't want to sign because it would be damaging for them. And of course, this is the challenge that Keir Starmer is going to have. But how can he, as a lawyer, suggest that Israel doesn't have a legal right to defend itself against a terrorist occupation? The nonsense, of course, about these councillors asking for a ceasefire is there was a ceasefire on October the 6th.
Yes. And it's hard to believe, Bim, isn't it, that it was a month ago tomorrow, October the 7th, when the horrific events of that day unfolded, much to everybody's absolute and utter shock. Have you been surprised at how the world has reacted, not just London, but, we've been talking earlier on this evening, about whether there should be a march at the weekend, whether Remembrance weekend is the right time for people to march for a free Palestine. But have you been surprised? I mean, I've been very surprised by the vitriol against Israel around the world.
Honestly, I'm not really. And the reason why I'm not is that I remember when Tony Blair finally was forced to step down. He has tried to make it look like it was all his choice. But of course, what you remember is that it was over Israel attacking Lebanon, where they had been bombed from. And the reason why I make that comparison with 2006, which is when this happened, is that actually the history of these things is when there's violence, for about 24 hours, people say, oh, it's terrible what's happened to Israel. And then Israel get all the flak. That is the pattern. And I think the only difference with this was that it wasn't really 24 hours, maybe 48 hours of support at the beginning. Right. And then the same pattern is there. So to be honest, I'm not surprised. What has surprised me is the degree to which, despite Keir Starmer's, I mean, it's obvious, in the polls, he's far ahead. There's no point me denying that. How much members of his own party seem to think he can be pushed around on this subject, which tells me that his support is a little thin.
Yeah. I think that's right, Alice, isn't it? Because
I don't know. I don't think so. I think, I mean, the question here is that, we keep hearing Israel has a right to defend itself, and of course that's never in question. I think what the people of Britain really want to hear is actually a humanitarian stance, that you can be, completely and feel very compassionate for Israeli citizens, as I do, and I feel strongly about that, but also for Palestinian citizens, because ultimately it's innocent lives here which are being lost on both sides. So regardless of the political complexities, which of course go very deep and Britain has to take a stance which puts our interests first as a nation. But really, I think what a lot of the British public want to know is that our politicians are basically feeling compassionate on a human level for civilians in both places.
I think you're right in terms of what people want. I just don't.
Yeah, well, that's what the polls say.
Well,
I mean, 78% of Britons actually agree with a ceasefire.
Look,
yeah, but
I'm not denying your
people
assessment of what people seem to want. I just happen to think that's not grown-up politics, right? It is very easy for any politician at any time to stand up and say, I solemnly believe in the right of, we need peace and ceasefire. Frankly, that's really easy. Anybody can do that. The difficult thing is to be a leader and say, how do you move from a military response to a political solution? And that is the thing.
The issue is this politics?
Well, also, the thing is, people can feel compassion for each side, and you can talk about a ceasefire, but why aren't people demanding for the return of the hostages and for Hamas to surrender their weapons? All of the onus is on Israel to not defend itself. Keir Starmer knows there's just no legal right. There's no legal right to ask a state to do that. Why are people not out marching, asking for the hostages to be returned?
Of electricity to a citizen population which is already incredibly weakened. I mean, there was a vote in the UN.
But an awful lot of
and the only two countries who abstained from providing humanitarian aid was Russia, who has, probably committed war crimes in Kiev. We don't know. There's some very serious conflict going on there, and then Britain and America.
United
That's
Nations
is
not an organisation I'm interested in hearing from,
No,
because they're also the same organisation that refused to condemn, that confused to condemn Hamas when they had a vote on it. But I think the point is an awful lot of propaganda comes out of the West Bank and out of Gaza, Laura, and because at the end of the day, 91% of their water, for example, comes from inside of Gaza. Israel has not got the capability to cut their water off, but you don't hear that because that's not the message that comes from inside of Gaza.
And talking of propaganda, of course, the news that comes out of Gaza is highly controlled, but we've got a bigger problem than that. The British population is woefully misinformed, dismally uninformed by the British media and especially the BBC, because they produce these very mealy-mouthed descriptions of Hamas.
Yes.
They create a false impression of a moral equivalence, which is why I think, debates like this are misinformed, because people think that they can talk about an internationally recognised government and a terrorist organisation as though there is any moral equivalence whatsoever.
I'm not talking about Hamas here. Obviously, I condemn the actions of Hamas. They're a terrorist group. I know the Christians in Palestine are suffering incredibly at the hands of persecution due to jihadist organisations like Hamas. The point here is I'm talking about citizens and innocent lives. There are 1 million children in Gaza, and I think they deserve to be represented in British politics and their voices heard. But at the moment, we are not hearing that from our political
but when
class
Hamas tell you that children are being killed, you can't necessarily just immediately believe that that is the case.
According to...
Hamas is saying that 4,000 children have been killed. They're saying that 10,000 people have been killed. They have not said that any Hamas fighters have been killed. All the people that are being killed, Bim, and I'll put this to you, apparently are either children or women or scientists. They don't believe that they've got any terrorists, which is exactly what the IDF are actually doing. They're supposed to be killing terrorists.
Look, I agree, and the difficulty with this is it is very, very hard to get the terrorists when they put themselves deliberately in the harm's way of civilians without collateral damage.
Okay,
now that is something.
I understand.
Now, I'm afraid. Now people will again pretend that isn't true. People will pretend that there is a solution, which is you can get terrorists at the same time as not killing civilians at the same time. And I wish that solution did exist. But nobody's been able to come up with it. And that's the sad truth. Now, look, I am very committed to us having a political solution that ends up with Palestinians finally having their own state. I want to put that on the record. However, right now, we are in a position where those civilians are actually being killed by Hamas. Yeah. Hamas is putting them in harm's way. Yeah. It makes no sense to say Israel has a right to defend itself, and then when Israel does things to defend itself, by the way, trying to minimise civilian casualties in the way that Hamas never did, never does.
More than any state ever does.
Ever does.
Israel's completely unimpeached.
And then when
in
they're
this
trying
respect.
to do, when they try to defend themselves, everybody comes down on them like a ton of bricks.
Right.
It's reasonable to say we need a political solution,
Yeah.
but right now the focus has to be getting Hamas. Hamas have proven themselves not to be a stable partner in that region.
Yes.
They've proven that.
And equally,
So that's the
Alice,
reason we're in.
I'll put this to you. I mean, the reason why people in Gaza in particular live such terrible lives and such downtrodden lives and such lives of desperation is because of Hamas. Because Hamas are
No,
running the place
absolutely.
into the ground. You know,
I
their
agree
leaders
with this.
are
I
living
agree
high
with
on the
this.
hog
Yeah.
in Qatar, billionaires flying around on private jets, having a great old time while directing people in tunnels, a network of tunnels. Let's not forget, you mentioned hostages. They've got a 9-month-old baby hostage underneath Gaza in a tunnel. I mean, what can you do with people like that?
There's no denying the atrocities of Hamas.
Right.
I'm absolutely not doing that. I'm saying here, actually, in fact, that is what we see. We see that there are elites and they seem to get away with this behaviour and they're never affected, and the ones who are affected are innocent civilians.
Exactly.
And my compassion is with them.
Yes,
on
but
both
Bim's right. I
sides.
mean, the
This
Hamas
isn't for me-
directly
yeah.
and deliberately use civilians as human shields,
No, but
as
exactly, yeah.
as sort of cannon fodder, if you like. They are in more danger from Hamas, actually, because the reason that there's a problem in Gaza, because children and women are being killed, is because of what happened on October the 7th. If Hamas hadn't done that, you know, Israel wasn't firing bombs into any part of the West Bank or into Gaza, were they, Laura?
No, well, of course, Hamas has fired tens of thousands of rockets in the last 20 years from Gaza into Israel.
And they're still doing it now.
Which is why Israel had to build the Iron Dome, which isn't perfect. Imagine living in Israel all these years and there's rockets fired every day into your country.
Yeah.
Those people don't have post-traumatic stress disorder because it's not post, they're in it all the time. It's highly stressful for the people of Israel living under that as well. Hamas are monsters and they have to go. What is, I think, completely shameful is the fact there are people who want to go on pro-Palestine and effectively pro-Hamas marches on Remembrance Day.
Yes.
You know, on the 11th. I can't,
And they should not be allowed to do that.
I can't believe that the Met Police has asked, in inverted commas, people not to protest, because there's very good grounds for banning a protest if it's going to cause public disorder. The idea that on the day when people should be respectfully, reverently and silently paying respects to the 880,000 soldiers who died in World War I, instead we'll have shouts of jihad and intifada in London.
Yeah.
Horrific.
It's not acceptable. It's not the day for it.
No.
And I don't think... I mean, I'm a staunch defender of free speech, but if there is one day that protests should be banned, it's that day.
Listen, I started the show with a little speech about free speech and about how important it was. And even though I despise an awful lot of what is said at these pro-Palestine marches, they have the right to do it. But just take the week off, will you? You know, you've done 4 weeks. A lot of people, Bim, have said, you know, that Sir Mark Rowley could ask Suella Braverman to ban the march. Obviously, there's a bit of reluctance to do that. But some have also said to me, where's Rishi Sunak in all of this? Why is he not coming out and asking for people, or maybe
He has made comments.
demanding that people don't march?
He has said it'd be provocative, I think, and controversial, didn't he?
The difficulty with these things is the moment that the Prime Minister says, right, this must happen, you're then in a position where people criticise the Prime Minister for interfering in operational matters, of which this is an operational matter. This is a technically operational matter, right?
Absolutely.
It'll be under law that has passed.
Yep.
You know, you can ban protests in certain circumstances, assuming that this meets that test, and I think it probably would. So I think that Prime Ministers just have to be a little careful how they do this. What I'm hoping is that what some people call the sort of usual channels or, you know, can come into operation and that this is banned. And we're not entirely sure whether that was the Met Police calling for it, the Prime Minister calling for it, the Home Secretary calling for it. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
The outcome is they can't do it on Remembrance Weekend.
Yeah.
And I think that I don't really think anybody needs to play politics of this, win political points. I think what the public wants to see the public wants to see Remembrance Day services, not mass protests. And however that's achieved, however quietly, it doesn't really matter.
It would also be a huge own goal for pro-Palestinian supporters. I mean, it would just be a terrible, terrible idea and a terrible look for them.
So can I push back on this? So half of me thinks that, if I'm really honest. I think that a lot of people who feel very strongly about this actually feel very strongly about it in the pro-Palestinian direction. I think people have to be really straightforward about that. If you're looking at the passion on this debate, I think a lot of the passion is in that direction.
There's
I think the bulk of the British public's in the middle somewhere, and they don't really know what to think. And so I wouldn't be so sure that everybody in our society really reveres Remembrance Day in the way that we'd like. I question that. I don't have any evidence.
I agree. I think it's like a bell curve. You know, you've got people at each end. But the idea of 11 o'clock on the 11th, somebody shouting jihad or waving an anti-Semitic placard anywhere near a remembrance event is.
I hope you're right.
Is abhorrent.
Well, we're going to come back. We're going to come back to this. I know
it's a celebration of British heroes and British
should
heroes
be.
who fought and died for our country's freedom.
Absolutely right. But a lot of people marching, don't think they're heroes.
Yeah.
A lot of people marching don't think that the British Empire was the right thing to commemorate, and neither were the two world wars. That's unfortunately, I think Bim's right. Coming up though.